So I just want to jump right in and get started with a question to Paulette Jordan. Ms. Jordan, there is a ranking of senators, U.S. senators, in terms of how conservative they are and how liberal they are. Democrats like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Doug Jones of Alabama, and John Tester of Montana are scored among the most conservative Democrats. Of course, among Republicans, they're not that conservative, but they're among Democrats, they're more conservative. While senators like Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and Jeff Merkley of Oregon and Cory Booker are ranked among the most liberal. Where do you think you would fall along those lines on the spectrum? And which senators do you think you'd most align with if you were elected?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I appreciate that, Scott. And first of all, good afternoon. I just want to say thank you all for being on and listening to my words, and I appreciate the good work that you're doing. To get right into it, I will tell you that I don't often consider myself in alignment with just one particular group over the other. I've often talked about my independence in this land coming from a unique heritage. So it's hard for me to really just say that I'm like this person or that person, primarily because my voice is so unique, being Indigenous, and there hasn't been a voice like mine in the U.S. Senate in some time now, actually since U.S. Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell. And speaking from that level of independence, being that we are not tied to party rhetoric or the partisanship, I think that's very important, and that's really what speaks to Idahoans, is that we act independently and we think for the people. And I think I would definitely look to those folks who are in similar alignment in that way. I've noticed that Senator Tester is much like that. He will want to work with both sides of the aisle. I think coming from the ag industry like I do, we want to work with folks who are going to be more in touch with our citizens, our local community members, and not just cut out Republicans or libertarians or independents or Democrats. We are looking at people as real human beings and want to get the job done. So to me, it's going to be who is about action, who is about actually working above the party line, and who's going to be willing to do what's right for the people. I did see that in Senator Mitt Romney. I think him acting more independently, acting even in some ways against his party to do what's right, and looking at this moral servitude. I think that's really what I would fall in line with, is those folks who are willing to do what's necessary, acting with this level, a higher level of moral authority. I think that intention is best in politics, and rather than like my opposition looking to serve the best interests of himself or the corporations. That is what I would say that I'm firmly against, and I know that people in this country are seeking leadership that will do more to address these issues that they're facing and dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you for that. Ray Ritz, I wanted to ask you, because we didn't have an opportunity to talk with you during the primary because you didn't have a primary opponent, but I wanted to ask you, what are your top 3 issues? I want to give you 3 minutes or so just to give the top 3 issues if you're elected. What are the main issues that you would focus on as a senator?
Well, the main issues, one is try to get some unity, because I know that I run the risk of, if people chose me as U.S. Senator, that I could actually, as a third party, be a deciding vote in who's running the U.S. Senate. The purpose is to try to move the Senate back to more of a commonsensical standard, where you're not listening to the special interests, but what's best for the people. So many things that are done, you read about later on that they've been helped out financially, privately. The U.S. senators have a tendency to get quite wealthy if you follow the track record over a long period of time. Another thing is to try to get people to understand that we're all created in the image of God: red, black, white, Japanese, Russian, Chinese, African, and we all have the same red blood. And if we follow the main tenets that Christ taught, that first we would love God with all our heart, and then we would love our neighbor as ourselves. If we did this, a lot of the problems would just disappear. But right now we have that nature that fights against that. And I would try best to stand for what's best for the people in general on that. And also, I look at science and try to get proper role for science that's really squared on, more like what Newton taught when he was doing all his research, and a lot of people followed Newton and all the techniques he used, and that provided very good science. One of the main things I'm very concerned about is if we have a CME from the sun or we have a major E&P pulse, is have we hardened the grid, because that's going to be a major factor. If the grid goes down for any length of time, because most of our transformers and major components are made overseas, we won't be up for 6 months to several years, and the result would be a vast loss of population due to our just-in-time inventory and people not being as reliant on themselves as possible and working with the neighbors and providing for their families.
Great, thank you very much. So I want to get to several issues. We've got kind of a laundry list of issues, so I'm hoping to kind of work through them quickly and have you guys give us your thoughts on where you stand on certain issues. I wanted to start with the impeachment trial of the president. As we know, the Senate failed to, or I should say they acquitted President Trump. If you had been a senator, how would you have voted in the impeachment trial of the president, and why? And we'll start with you, Mr. Ritz.
Well, after reading a lot on what was going on and who was doing what between Biden, his son, and the influence that they try to accuse Trump of, and try to get the facts straight, and then you find out that the facts that they had put forth through the Steele dossier didn't turn out right because that was phonied up. You know, and I would consider this like a trial, like I've been in a trial before for a court on a civil case, and I would look at the facts, and from what I could understand and everything I could get, sorting out through the all sorts of lies and falsehoods that have been put out, probably on both sides. The key is to search for the real truth. And in a jury trial, I take that extremely important. It's extremely important to me to do the right thing. And from my viewpoint, there's reasonable doubt that he was guilty. Besides, you know, when you find out that, you know, the Democratic Party had also play in it too, and certain other things went into effect, and Seth Rich had got in and turned over some important data from the Democratic Party, you got to see a general picture of what was really sort of going on, even though he got killed for it, because they never found her and he was never up.
All right, very good, thank you. Ms. Jordan, how would you answer that question?
Well, again, I think it's important that people understand that we need a leadership that's going to be present and is going to listen. The Senate did not allow witnesses and the documents to be heard. I think it's very important that the public is part of the process and that we uphold complete transparency in all of our government proceedings. And being that that is very important, I would have supported every single documentation and witness to come forward to ensure that the people are understanding what is exactly happening. I knew that there are many more counts that weren't presented to the US Senate, and knowing that those particular counts didn't make it, and the few that did, I think that the people deserved to hear out what was happening. And I do know that those folks who dissented, such as Senator Mitt Romney, I think I would have definitely stood with him in terms of standing even aside from party, putting party aside to do what's right for the American public.
And so do you feel the Democrats in the Senate failed, or in Congress failed to present a case adequately?
No, I think what they did is they thought that of the 31 plus counts that were held against the president, that they figured the few counts that they sent over to the Senate were going to be good enough, and I felt that they did not press hard enough. But knowing that that was the case, the challenges remain, that it was, you know, the rhetoric aside, the partisanship was unfortunate. because people were standing with each other's parties and instead should have held to the facts. Like I said, it should have been based off of the witnesses and the documents that were there before them.
Okay, thank you. And so one of the biggest challenges I think we face, and particularly one of the biggest challenges that Congress faces, is the national or the federal budget deficit and the national debt. Ms. Jordan, we'll start with you. What would you do? How would you address the federal budget deficit and the national debt?
Well, nothing simple to be put in a few words, but the bigger issue is, the fact that we do have a senator who has been putting our country into debt. I think of many folks who are very familiar with his term in office, how far downhill we've gone in terms of our debt in this country. But the bigger issue is now to stop the spending. We need to close all the loopholes, the subsidization of our corporations and billionaires. And because we're not doing that, we're throwing our people's taxpaying dollars away really into the wind and not into our economy. We're going to have to start taking a hard look as to how we're wanting to address this issue with our now what feels like a second economic crisis that we're facing. Folks that I've been working with at the national front, we're talking about stimulation. And I think this is where we have to start promoting our representatives to get back to work. They need to come up with bipartisan legislation that will serve as a relief fund to help those folks who were nearing evictions and having trouble with putting food on the table. These are very real concerns for people that I think our representative, Senator Jim Risch, is certainly at a loss, and he has unfortunately not been sincere in handling this issue to directly address the concerns of Idahoans. But yet this is why we are stepping up in this process. My hope, my intention is to serve in this regard, working across both sides of the aisle and coming up with legislation that will help address the economic crisis. First of all, by means of lifting up our people, getting funding into the communities that need it best and most. But those folks, when we're talking jobs at this current time, we're talking about boosting small businesses. We're talking about creating a currency that will be direct, formulating digital wallets so that we're eliminating a lot of the middlemen, saving trillions of dollars for the country. I think we also have to look at cutting in certain areas where we're paying for chronic health care. And there are all sorts of areas of the budget that we've taken a hard look at that we want to get down to addressing once in office. But I think this is the biggest tactic is to ensure that people understand that there is going to be honest leadership working on their behalf to ensure that we're not continuing to contribute to the debt and we're not continuing to subsidize corporations and billionaires, and that we're not continuing to allow them to shore their monies in offshore accounts. And closing those loopholes, I think, will be critical, and keeping that money, US dollars, here in the United States in our economy will be essential.
And do you think we have a spending problem or a taxation problem?
Both. I think we're going to have to take a look at both the taxation issue that we're facing and the spending, looking at how we're throwing away, again, billions of dollars to these corporations, the elitists that are in our country. Just hearing case after case and how they're handling COVID relief funding. It's unfortunate that, again, it comes down to the divide in our nation and what we're seeing with the House, where they're passing a $3 trillion COVID relief budget. And as soon as it gets to the Senate, they want to table that and sit on that bill for months. And while people are suffering, whether through the COVID pandemic or they're suffering through the financial crisis and trying to maintain their jobs, people are caught in the middle. And you have the House, or excuse me, the Senate, who is promoting the HEROES Act as a contradiction to the HEALS Act in contradiction to the HEROES Act, which is cutting $2 trillion from a budget that would go directly to the people. And instead, they want their money, the people's money, to go to their friends who are contractors in the military division. And I think that's just, it's dishonorable. And I hope that we have many more people who are watching and will vote, especially knowing that they know that their representation of our state and the country, who are standing against their best interest, are working against their better interest. I think it's important that people take action in this election cycle and understand that these very big issues and concerns aren't going to work themselves out if we continue to keep these same people in these seats. And that's why, again, I just push that this is imperative that people vote and take action early. And whether they're voting by mail or like we see in our special session that's happening today, that they are able to push something similar to voting centers and to just keep people active and have access to their right to vote.
And Mr. Ritz, how would you address the federal budget deficit and the national debt?
Well, you have to go back in history and look at what happens when you run up debt of this nature and what happens to the countries that when it finally implodes, they have massive crises. You get a hyperinflation, you get a deflationary depression. And with the unemployment right now, we've had since the COVID lockdowns, you've had upwards to 57 million since mid-March that have been unemployed. Of that, maybe 20 to 25 million have gone back to work. I mean, we don't have accurate figures on it. It's real hard to get. You have to get through the state unemployment rolls. And a lot of states were way behind in having people get covered under unemployment because their systems were not up to the load that they got hit with. The deficit spending won't end well. Historically, it does not end well. We had a surplus late 50s, early 60s, and then we got Lyndon Baines Johnson. Kennedy sort of held the line to a point. I liked Kennedy back then. When I look back, he had a lot of courage. But with Lyndon Baines Johnson, the spending guns and butter at the same time started that routine. And in the early 70s, they decided to borrow from the Social Security fund to balance the budget with the idea that we'll pay it back, which they never did, because right now there's nothing but IOUs basically in this Social Security fund. They were never supposed to touch that. There was too much money there, there's too much temptation, and once the politicians got in it, it's been all downhill since. Reagan sort of held it back some, and then Clinton, even though he had his issues, things did better under him as far as budget deficit, but it was still trending down, and we've just taken off in this last number of years since the 08-09 crisis, which, like in the movie The Big Short, a lot of corporate people that were involved, the banks, big real estate companies, the executives, maybe one or two lower S-line people went to jail. The big fish got away because no one would deal with it. With the corruption that was going on, and that threw millions of families out in the street. The lending standards and the credit problems were epic during that time and leading up to it. And once it hit, you saw the effects. Even Idaho got hurt really hard in that. But we came back fast because we were much better financial shape. Another thing is, credit card debt.
Well, we're talking about the federal budget deficit. And
right.
The senator, if you're elected on November 3rd and you take office in January, what would you do? And we had a federal budget deficit before COVID. So what would you do as senator? How would you address the budget deficit?
Well, first we start cutting off all the non-essentials that we don't need. There's a lot of things that can be cut off. And then you have to work on...
Do you have examples of non-essentials?
Well, there's a lot of the grants that we give for research go to things that don't make sense. There's a lot of road projects that don't make sense, that go nowhere. And there's a lot of science spending on the social aspect as far as social welfare, the schools, and what we're getting for that money a lot of times does not give the results that we're expecting. Throwing money at it won't work. And even the military has its major issues because there is a lot of problems with cost control. And the military is a big budget, but then you have to have the Social Security on top of it. That's added to the budget. Because we borrowed the money, now we borrow money to pay Social Security. That is a systemic problem from the early 70s when they started borrowing money from it. That is going to be a very difficult one to deal with. Raising taxes at this present time would be an absolute killer. So what we have to do is start cutting budget items over a period of time as a percentage of each budget, and they have to get more efficient. Do we have the time? That's the big question. And no matter what you do right now with what's going on, I think you're hung if you do and hung if you don't in a lot of ways. You can go both ways. And this one, both parties were responsible for this. They did it to us. They did it. And, you know, they looked after their own special interests instead of the special interests of the people as a whole, the common good. They just left that out.
And do you think the tax structure needs to be changed at all? Do you think we have a
Yes.
tax problem?
I never did care for the IRS. I heard too many horror stories in multiple places of how, you know, big people would have lawyers that get off, but the average person that got hung by the IRS, they just take bank accounts and the whole works, where the rich, and they have lawyers to protect them. And they have ways to protect them.
Would you further cut taxes, or would you increase taxes to work on the deficit?
We'd have to gradually cut taxes for the simple fact that we're trying to restart the economy, because right now our money velocity has dropped to 1-to-1 almost. And we need a higher money velocity turning the economy, which puts more people back to work, which will actually add more tax dollars, but you have to gradually cut back the amount you're taxing people, particularly on the lower levels.
Okay.
And then up to the super rich, now they have things that need to be taken care of as far as some of the exemptions that they use need to be dropped out. They should pay their fair share too. And corporations, a lot of times, because they have CapEx spending, you can write that off on taxes over a period of time. So a lot of companies, you know, they buy companies, they can write that off against their taxes, so they end up paying no taxes. And a corporate buyout problem that we have is they use other people's money to buy another company when they should use their own. And so we don't end up paying taxes in the process because of that. And it's a game that's played on Wall Street that way.
All right, I want to shift gears. Ms. Jordan, the coronavirus pandemic, one of the things that the pandemic has laid bare is the untenable nature of our country's healthcare system. For example, if someone loses their job, they lose their healthcare. What would your solutions be to our current healthcare system? Would you support something like Medicare for All, a hybrid model, or would you support less government involvement? What would your solutions be?
Yeah, that's great. And I would have more of a response. I was thinking we had maybe like less than a minute to respond to these questions, and I try not to suck up all the air in the room. But I'm happy to respond to the last question more. So, but just to move on to your question here, you know, I've often said to you folks, you know, in this line of work that with the folks that I have who are my key advisors in healthcare, we've actually looked at the data, and it's shown that with the National Institute of Health, and of course, many of the programs that we work with nationally, they're all saying that we have no data to really stand on. And I think it really starts first collecting the right data. And I really want to look at how we're able to cut all the chronic, the spending when it comes to chronic health care. When it comes down to it, we spent over $21 trillion so far in the last 10 years on chronic health care. Last week, I took a visit to the Boise Center on Functional Medicine. And it's remarkable to see this line of technology that's happening to incorporate better healthcare that's integrative and solutions driven to address chronic illnesses that would really drive down costs, but is also affordable to the people. And I want to see more clinics like this happening, popping up all over the country. And it's a blessing that we have something like this in Idaho, because these are good folks who want to see people's illnesses addressed versus plugging in the pharmaceutical industry to address those ills and driving up costs for families. And being that this is one of the #1 concerns in this country when it comes down to how they're facing homelessness, or where they're going to basically invest their money, whether that's paying for necessities at home or healthcare, their health bill. And a lot of our people are still struggling, and we fought really hard back in 2018 to ensure that we could expand Medicaid to address those who are caught in that healthcare gap. And I think now moving forward, we got to look at the data, build a plan for healthcare, and work to address all the situations that we face with the way we allow our health insurance companies to have the priority to decide whether they're going to see a patient or not, and what they're going to cover or not. And we want to certainly take the big pharma voice out of that equation. I think that that's a big part of the problem in this country. But knowing that we have some data to work with, and we know that we have integrative medicine and healthcare that can be incorporated into the current Affordable Care Act, I think there are opportunities for the people to not only save money in this country, but to start directing money into the areas that need be. And while we're able to address this very large issue that looms over us, I think this is an opportunity for key figures like myself who are more about action, and we're not beholden to the insurance companies or big pharmaceutical industries. I think this is an opportunity for us to really change the system. And I know that people are looking for leadership that is willing to do so, knowing that lobbyists tend to control, a big part of what's happening on Capitol Hill. But I do see an opportunity there, and we've already been talking about ways that we can maneuver integrative healthcare into our current healthcare system, which will work to address all of these ills that our country faces.
And so it sounds like you're in favor of maintaining the current system with some more legislative additions to encourage or incentivize or suggest these kinds of changes that you think will end up saving money. Am I reading that right?
Yes, in a way. I would say only because we see how tough it is to shift the legislature as we see. Hoping we do flip the Senate. I want to see some balance in Congress. And I never make promises I can't keep, but what I do know is that we have folks who are on both sides of the aisle, willing to cut the fat, willing to see that we're spending an overabundance of our people's resources on chronic health care. But I think that both sides of the aisle also see that addressing these chronic illnesses with functional medicine, knowing that that we're talking about nutritional health care, behavioral health, we're talking in all the right senses that I feel people are more adherent to understand that whether you're on the left or the right, it makes sense to you. But we want healthcare that works, and everybody wants healthcare that's affordable and accessible. But this is the way that we promote that accessibility, and building on this new healthcare infrastructure. I think that we just have to prioritize people's treatments, starting with primary care, and supporting the idea that Medicare stands for increasing access to healthcare as a human right. And however, my plan calls for action in a Medicare for All Plus, which is that we need a healthcare system which puts data on the center stage of the effort. We need to incentivize practices, procedures, and medications that are cost effective. And this is how we achieve massive savings. This is how we tackle the burden of chronic disease. And this is also how we make healthcare a patient-centered activity instead of making it a profit revenue-centered activity.
But so Medicare for All Plus, so you are recommending a single-payer government, single-payer system?
Well, right now, again, I would say that one of the most important things that we can do is incorporate the best practices of integrative and functional medicine, primary care. Again, it's hard to say to you that this is what we're going to do, other than what I do know that we can shift into, because when I work with both Republicans and Democrats, I hear excitement on the front line that yes, this will save in terms of costs. This will prevent us from being a revenue-centered activity for folks. And I think that because we can shift to that area, this is an area that I know that we can make improvements. But ultimately, the goal would be to get to a single-payer healthcare program. While that seems like a dream pie in the sky kind of notion, I do believe that there are more folks in this country who are leaning in that direction and understanding that as long as we can get people access to primary care, that is the first step in the right direction. And I will say that when I talk about primary care, these services include nutritional therapies and services that address social detriments of health, and services that are effective for behavioral and emotional health, and we will substantially reduce those costs. But I'm entirely committed to healthcare as a human right and not as a privilege, which is as what we see today. And so I will support a Medicare for All if it includes these changes in primary care, and ensuring that regardless of where we are or how one obtains their insurance coverage, that we are fighting for the people's rights to access to healthcare, period.
Great, thank you. Mr. Ritz, your position on Medicare for all and fixes to the healthcare system?
Well, if we look at what Europe and England's been doing, they have a system in Canada that has a very similar system to that. And much of it's very rationed. It's very difficult to get in. The time lag when you find out you have something that's really like a cancer, and that to get in to get treated and that stuff, a lot of times you don't make it before you get there. And I'm looking at in the schools teaching children on how to nutritionally take care of themselves better. There's a lot of practices that we do: drinking, smoking, overeating, particularly certain types of foods are very bad for us. And as we have a lifestyle of that, when we get older, it catches up to us really fast, particularly when you get to the late 50s, early 60s. And by the time you get to 70s, then your costs are very high to fix the problem. We need competition also among the companies to bring it the cost of medical insurance down too. And right now, medical insurance in many places is just absolutely sky high.
So you
Now,
would support the current system with just less government regulation?
Less government on that, because it's going to be needed to get the competition. And you need to allow for more natural treatments that have been proven to work. Like in the 1800s, and that's a lot of people use natural stuff. The Indians had a lot of natural stuff they used because they didn't have doctors, and they learned by trial and error. The Chinese, the same way. A lot of those treatments do work when applied properly, but we have to have a particular mindset to use it, and a particular mindset to eat correctly. If we do not eat correctly, we will have health problems or in time. It just builds on itself.
All right, thank you.
There's Christian groups that do insurance, and it's half the cost.
Okay, so Ms. Jordan, would you favor breaching the lower Snake River dams?
Yes, I actually favor not only a climate crisis plan that addresses clean energy or the energy that we're utilizing, but I think people have to take a hard look at the economic impacts that we have on dams that are just unnecessary and that hurt our entire economy. I think people need to really get to the facts, and I want folks to understand that this is going to be a fact-driven decision. It's going to be a decision that's going to benefit the entire economy. And of course, we want to ensure that we're looking at our state's future and our nation's future when it comes to our environmental resources. We have to protect our water, we have to protect our air, and ensure that we're making the most plausible decisions that best suit everyone. And bringing all the stakeholders to the table means I'm looking out for the agricultural industry, I'm looking out for jobs, people who need access to clean energy jobs in our state. And of course, bottom line economy, the GDP of our state. I think that's going to be important and imperative that we need leadership who is going to look above and beyond the bureaucracies that we see that are having a stranglehold on our energy division right now in the Northwest region. But yes, I do support the breaching of the dams, but doing that in the right way. And I know that there's many plans that we've seen. We've looked at the bottom line environmental impact statements. We've looked at every single study that's out there that poses either a threat to some or that poses solutions to others. And I think by looking at both sides, we can certainly come up with an agreement with everyone in tow, sitting at the table. And I find that when we looked at meeting with everyone from all across the aisle, we've met with people on Capitol Hill, we met with the tribes, we met with every single key stakeholder, even those in the ag industry. And I know there's a way, and we definitely have a solution or a plan in terms of how we would address this once in Congress. But I do feel that that is the right way forward. We need to protect our salmon. For me, coming from an indigenous community, we consider our salmon sacred. I know that this is a relevant issue to those who are anglers in our state. I know this is a very relevant issue to those who are in small towns like Riggins and Stanley. And knowing that this is a very big concern, even to our counterpart, my colleague, Representative Mike Simpson. I'm appreciative of those voices who are willing to stand on the right side to ensure that we're protecting these types of resources for our children's future.
And have you had a chance to look at the Green New Deal, and what are your thoughts on that? Is that something you'd support?
Absolutely, and I would tell you that I'm actually part of I founded the Climate Crisis Council through the DNC back in August of 2019. And there we promoted a set of policies through the DNC, and we're able to get a good chunk of our policy recommendations to the policy platform for the party. And I'm very appreciative of our policy council and what work we've done. We've done that in collaboration with good folks like others, like Sanders and his teams, and people who are committed to the environment, and like me, committed to the rights of nature. I think it's very critical that people understand that the climate crisis that we're in should be one of the top priorities that people begin discussing in this election period, because it's an opportunity for young folks to understand which leaders are going to be on the right side of the future and who's going to stand up for them and protect their best interests. Because as I've been raised, our value system is that this land doesn't belong to us. It belongs to our children and our children's future. So I'm here to stand up for the cause and championing the fact that this is a human-derived issue that we're facing, that this is a human-caused climate crisis that we're in, and subsidizing coal and subsidizing the energy companies like the oil industry. All that needs to go away. And those are the type of loopholes that I speak of, that I ensure that once I'm in office, I will certainly stand against those subsidies, because I want to prevent our country from going down in the wrong direction. And we have multiple studies to prove that misinformation that is spread throughout our country and in communities like ours here in Idaho, whether it's working with coal or working with oil and natural gas, that these energy options are certainly not the way forward. But clean energy and optimizing clean energy is a productivity of our healthcare policy and a solution that I want to certainly implement.
And we heard a proposal for a carbon fee and a dividend payment. Are you familiar with that? And if so, what would you support some policy like that?
I've heard of many policies all over the world. I think multiple countries who are looking at this issue will really find that, and I guess for me, I'm not about recreating the wheel. I think we have to certainly look at those countries who have been very progressive in taking action. Other countries that are looking at this as a tax proposal already in similar places like ours here in the United States, it will come down to having a high level of integrity. For me, I think too, we haven't seen a whole lot of action or really much data for us to found ourselves upon. I think once we can collect data, that will be helpful, because I'm certainly not one that wants to just simply tax everything and anything. In fact, this is why, in my last statement, I wanted to say that I really want to talk about the tax structure and taxing our poor less, and actually removing those taxes for our poor, and start taxing those corporations who are continuing to pollute our country. And as they're continuing to do so, and declaring bankruptcy, and being able to, take the exit door out, and eliminating their responsibility to address the conditions that they've caused for the communities that are facing, the damages. I think that's the travesty that we face, but I want to make sure that we are holding these corporations accountable, and that's another way to do that. If we were able to submit, a taxation to carbon emissions, then yes, we certainly wanted to go there. But again, as I've talked about this with my climate council, we want to make sure that we have all the data that best suits the country. And right now we don't have a clear report, but we are working on it.
And I do want to open it up to board members, if there are any board members who want to have the candidates address any issues.
Well, I'd just like to, this is Mike Wetherill, I'd just like to point out that there was an excellent article in the New York Times this last weekend on a study of the carbon tax and how it could be implemented that people may want to read, because the author is a economist who says there's a very good argument for it, and it would probably be the most effective way to reduce carbon emissions. But as a question,
Yeah, I would agree with you there, sir, by the way.
I'm sorry.
I just want to
Have
say
you-
for full transparency that, I want to make sure that we have the data to stand with us when we make these proposals, that I'm right there with you.
In terms of the Senate, where you want to go, you start out with very low seniority. And you may actually have a little bit more because you've served in the state legislature. They even give you credit for that. But how would you propose to get to know your colleagues so that you can be an effective representative in that body?
Mhm. Well, one thing that very few folks know about me is that I've actually worked on the Hill for the last decade. I represented the tribes across this country through the National Indian Gaming Association as an elected official. And in that capacity, it was my role to act in a nonpartisan fashion to go to the Hill on various bills for the communities of this country that were seeking balance, seeking fairness. And these bills that were passed were tackling taxation, tackling healthcare, education, public lands. There were bills that were looking to address the economic viability and sovereignty of the tribes. And I think all of this really relates to people in this country in every state, not just the tribes. But as I was working with folks on both sides of the aisle, I was able to garner some great relationships. And I would tell you, I have worked with those like Mitch McConnell, and I have worked with those who are leaders now in the House and in the Senate. I feel that it's, for me, being that person who has been able to pull or work with both sides of the aisle, that is it's a unique gift to have, because working with both Republicans and Democrats, they see that I'm not here for the party rhetoric. I'm here to be above that and act in a very professional way, but in respect to all people. And I think that goes a long way. But having those relationships, that is very important. And yes, you're right. I'll be coming in as a freshman, someone who will, be quote unquote new. But everyone starts from somewhere. Even Senator Risch, he's, started with that blank slate, and you have to work your way up. But I think all that comes by having that similar respect. And I will tell you that a friend of mine who served on my team, he once told me that he was a staunch Republican, said he supports Trump, but he also supports me. And it was interesting because he said, everything that people say about you is true. And I thought he was kind of taking a jab at me and being very funny. And I says, yeah, and he says, well, I call Republicans in the state and people that know you nationally, and everyone says good things about you. And I wasn't expecting that. I figured that, those who are Republican might take a jab at you for being a Democrat or say something, negative or mean. And he says, no, they said that you were very respectful, you were very professional, and you, as a businesswoman, you're very good to work with. And I said, well, good. I appreciate that, because, I'm walking here with the voices of my people, and I, definitely want to make sure that we're representing our communities in the best way possible. But again,
would you commit to staying awake at all sessions of the Senate?
I promise you I will stay awake. I only have 2 kids that keep me awake all hours of the day, but I'm very committed to my job.
Are there other questions from other board members? Issues, I know we have a laundry list of issues that we haven't even gotten to, but I want to make sure that board members have an opportunity if there's a specific issue that they want to ask the candidates about. Well, then I will ask the next question about the handling of the coronavirus pandemic from a federal level. How would you rate, or how would you assess the United States handling of the coronavirus pandemic, specifically with the handling of CARES Act relief funding, the public health response from a national message of wearing a mask, stay-at-home orders, and particularly our early response to the pandemic, and then if we have a little bit of time to talk about the handling of the Postal Service. Ms. Jordan, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Well, in addition to ignoring the early warning signs, the U.S. government has largely failed in developing a national response to COVID-19, the outbreak. And when a pandemic strikes, it is primarily because decisions were made without using data to assess the risk of an outbreak turning into a pandemic. So I would say that when we don't have data, we must use an abundance of caution to protect public health at all costs. And those countries which isolated themselves, they first did this in the best terms in limiting the hospital system overload and death. And from an economic perspective, I will tell you that the relief legislation we've seen come out of Congress falls short for two main reasons. I'll say that it doesn't do enough to help small businesses and their employees. It is primarily a corporate bailout with hidden tax breaks for millionaires. And I don't feel like we have seen this covered enough. But this approach is only going to result in another bank bailout like we had after the 2008-2009 recession. And I would say that what we need to do now is to listen to the experts, collect the data, expand and target testing, and then make more informed decisions. So we need to ramp up large-scale testing and make use of these public programs that provide healthcare to those who don't otherwise have it, and protecting our most vulnerable and containing the health crisis as we can best contain it, which must be our first priority.
And the postal.
I want to say to you, Scott, if you let me, if I may,
Yeah.
I want to say that at the same time that we do need to develop a comprehensive plan on how to help our entrepreneurs reawaken and rebuild our economy and society. I've watched this happen, unfortunately, and trying to help in terms of reaching out to our governor and others who have not seen action locally. I'll say that we have to focus all of our financial backstop programs on small businesses. We have to prohibit the Fed from buying up outstanding corporate debt securities and provide capital to all the rural hospitals to stay afloat. And I would advocate for Congress to add to the budget of the Center for Integrative Health from the National Institute of Health to investigate nutritional and other low-cost therapies that are helpful to strengthening the immune system. Right now, that's really all we have. We have to strengthen our immune system, mitigate the morbidity and mortality from COVID-19 and other coronaviruses. Congress could also provide funding to ramp up regional and mid-sized meat processors to mitigate the risk imposed by the concentration of major industry players. And the lack of a stable and secure food supply will certainly be a national security issue. And this is why, in our tour next week, we do plan to visit all these local clinics. We want to be able to stop by and draw attention to not only these healthcare centers, but talk about the jobs and the ag industry that is at risk as well.
And handling of the Postal Service, it's kind of coronavirus related.
Yes, actually, I talked with a good friend of mine, a constitutional lawyer back in DC the other day about this issue. She gave me a great summary, about really what's happening with the new Postmaster General. And it's interesting watching these hearings at the national level because what I see less and less of is, folks really understanding that, in a nutshell, it's basically taking access away from the people for the right to vote. And we want to make sure that people have accessibility, especially in this pandemic. And this is going to be a very heavy issue that I hope to draw more eyes or attention to, because it's, I think for any of us, who fought so hard to have the right to vote, even my own folks, it's, I think it's just going to be imperative that all eyes and attention are on this so that we can maintain accessibility for people who don't want to leave their homes because of COVID, or who, have a condition or disability, people who are used to voting by mail, that their vote counts and that their voice is being heard. And if we have a Postmaster General who is not willing to take accountability and is removing technology or equipment from postal service areas, and if they're shutting down the post office or not willing to fund it, then that's going to be a very real problem. But I think that, like everyone else who is pushing this, we have to continue to push a representative to do his job, to go back to DC and pass a bipartisan bill that will serve the American public by funding the U.S. Postal Service.
Okay. Mr. Ritz, how would you rate the federal government's response to coronavirus?
I would rate it as far as being halfway effective from understanding what they were facing, because China hasn't been what you call clear on what they got out of Wuhan. So the Chinese withheld information, which delayed a response. When the response was come, then a lot of people were not happy. I would figure the response was fairly effective to a certain point, but people were traveling from Wuhan already over to this country and different other places, and the infection had already started. Probably they estimate late November, first part of December when it was getting out, and they had a major event there where everybody scattered across the world. And Italy had a lot of people also affected by that. And so the response was the cat got out of the bag in January and February. By the time the response could ramp up, it was already too late, because any infectious disease, you got to catch it in the absolute early stages. If you're not informed of something that went wrong in a lab someplace and it got out and it was kept hush hush for a certain amount of time, then your delayed response is going to it will be met with failure. And most people that have got the virus, a lot of the younger people really got sick for, depending on the person, 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks, then came out of it. Yeah, there was some side effects, but they came out of it pretty good. Now, for people in the older bracket, 60 plus, if you already had health problems going into it, then, you know, it would have, if you have 2 or 3
We're talking about the response.
right.
We're talking about the federal response. I think we're all aware of what happened with coronavirus. So, but do you think the response was adequate, especially when the cat was out of the bag in January and February? Did we adequately respond?
Yes, we did adequately respond, but the problem is the shutdown did not do anything for it, because Sweden didn't shut down, they didn't have masks, and they had the same rate, death rate, and infection rate as we did with the shutdowns. So basically what we did was destroy the economy in the process. This will create other major problems, and your suicide rate will probably be 4 to 5 times plus greater than the death rate from the virus itself, because you're going to cause enormous stress in families, spousal abuse, abuse of children. This is just a natural outgrowth of this problem. The response in shutting the economy down over the virus was a complete, utter disaster.
And as a senator,
Not do anything, because there's peer-reviewed studies that have been done years in the past and were being currently done in Europe, England, that the masks are totally ineffective. Even the N95 masks are not as effective as they think.